Every story leaves something behind. A whisper, a shadow, a question that was never answered. Here, we dig through the forgotten files, the unsolved mysteries, the chilling true crimes, and the horrors people wish had stayed buried. From haunted legends to real-life nightmares, every tale is pulled straight from the horror archives. So turn down the lights, put on your headphones, and step carefully, because once a story enters the horror archives, it never truly leaves. Ghost towns have a way of holding onto things, memories, history, sometimes something worse. The 5 stories you're about to hear were submitted by people who visited towns that were supposed to be empty. Towns with no living residents, no active infrastructure, no reason for anything to still be there. And yet, something was. The first story is called The Town That Still Had Power. A photographer drives 4 hours into the Nevada desert to shoot an abandoned mining town. When he arrives, the streetlights are on. All of them. In a town that's been dead since 1987, the streetlights were on. That was the first thing I noticed when we rolled into Dunhaven, Nevada, at about 11 at night. Every single streetlight on the main road was glowing a dull orange, casting these long pools of light onto cracked pavement and boarded-up storefronts. This town had been abandoned since 1987. I'm a photographer. I specialize in decay, old buildings, forgotten infrastructure, that kind of thing. My buddy Marcus and I had driven 4 hours into the desert to shoot Dunhaven, because it's one of those places that just got left behind when the mine closed. No one bought the land. No one tore anything down. It just sat there, rotting in the sun for almost 40 years. But the streetlights were on. Marcus said it was probably some kind of solar setup the county installed to discourage squatters. That made enough sense for me to keep driving. We parked near what used to be the general store and started unloading our gear. The air was dry and still, the kind of desert silence where you can hear your own blood moving. The buildings along the main strip were in rough shape, sagging roofs, broken windows stuffed with old newspaper, paint peeling in long curls. But under the streetlights, they almost looked occupied. Like if you squinted, you could imagine someone sweeping the front porch of the old barber shop. We walked about 2 blocks in before I noticed the second wrong thing. There were no insects around the streetlights. You know how in any small town at night, every light source is swarming with moths and beetles. These lights had nothing, just clean, empty cones of orange light falling on empty sidewalks. I mentioned it to Marcus. He shrugged, said maybe it was the bulb type. We started shooting photos of the old movie theater. Its marquee still had letters on it, spelling out something that had been rearranged by wind into nonsense. I was framing a shot of the ticket booth when Marcus grabbed my arm. He pointed down the street. One of the streetlights had gone out. Not flickered, not dimmed, just off. The one at the far end of the main road, maybe 300 yards away. It left a gap of darkness between the last 2 lit poles. And as we watched, the next one went out too. Then the next. They were going dark in sequence, coming toward us. Marcus laughed nervously and said it was probably a timer, a rolling shutoff. But the lights weren't going out at random. They were going out one by one, from the far end of town, heading in our direction, like something was walking beneath them and turning them off as it passed. I started packing up my camera. Marcus was still trying to rationalize it when the light directly across the street from us went out, the one right above our car. We both froze. In the sudden patch of darkness, I could see our car clearly enough in the spill from the remaining lights. But there was something else. A shape standing on the sidewalk on the other side of the street, right at the edge of where the light had been. It was tall, too tall, and it wasn't moving. I didn't look directly at it. I don't know why. Some instinct told me not to. I just kept my eyes on the car and told Marcus we needed to leave. He must have seen it too because he didn't argue. We walked to the car, not running. Something in me said running would be worse. I got in the driver's side and turned the key, and the engine caught immediately. As I pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Every streetlight behind us was turning back on, one by one in the same sequence, like whatever had turned them off was now walking back the way it came. And in the brief moment before the light nearest to where we'd parked flickered back to life, I saw the shape was gone. I still have the photos from that night. In one of them, a long exposure of the movie theater. There's a blur on the far right side of the frame. I didn't see anything there when I took the shot, but in the image, it looks like a figure standing just outside the light. It has no features, just height, just presence. I sent the photo to a friend who does digital forensics for a living. He said the blur wasn't motion. It was something that was standing perfectly still for the entire 8-second exposure, but was only barely reflecting light, like it was almost not there at all. I never went back to Dunhaven. Marcus won't talk about it. There's something standing in the dark that's barely there. That's the kind of thing that stays with you. But the next story takes a different approach. This one's called The Census That Didn't Match. A college student drives to an officially abandoned town in West Virginia. The population sign says 12. The town has 12 maintained houses, and the names on the doors belong to men who died underground in 1961. The population sign said 12. That's what stopped me. The town of Felter, West Virginia, had been listed as abandoned in every database I checked before driving out there. 0 population, dissolved municipal charter, no active postal route, but the green road sign at the town limit, the official kind with the white reflective lettering, read Felter, Pop. 12. I'm a civil engineering student. Last fall, I was doing a project on failed infrastructure in Appalachian coal towns. Felter was on my list because its water treatment facility was supposedly still standing, and I wanted to photograph it for my thesis. I drove out on a Saturday morning in October. The road in was narrow and overgrown, branches scraping both sides of my car. Felter sat in a shallow valley between 2 ridges, and when I came around the last bend and saw it laid out below me, it looked exactly like what I expected. 24 structures in various stages of collapse, a church with no roof, a row of company houses with their porches caved in, no cars, no movement, except the sign, Pop. 12. I parked near the old company store and got out. The air smelled like wet leaves and something faintly chemical, probably runoff from the old mine. The silence was heavy, not peaceful, heavy, like the valley was holding its breath. I walked toward the water treatment building, which was at the far end of what used to be the main road. Most of the houses I passed were clearly empty, doors hanging open, windows broken, floors visible through gaps in the walls. But about halfway down the road, I passed a house that was different. Its windows were intact, the porch didn't sag, and there was a curtain in the front window, not old and rotting, a clean white curtain. I stopped and stared at it. Then I noticed the house next to it also had curtains, and the one across the street had a doormat, a clean doormat on a swept porch, in front of a house in a town that didn't exist anymore. I counted them as I walked, 12 houses total that showed signs of maintenance, curtains, swept porches. One had a garden hose coiled neatly by the front steps. 12 houses. Pop. 12. I told myself maybe there were holdouts, people who refused to leave when the town dissolved. It happens in Appalachia, but none of these houses had cars. None had power lines running to them, and I couldn't hear a single sound from inside any of them. I kept walking to the water treatment plant, took my photos, and started heading back. That's when I noticed something I'd missed on the way in. Each of the 12 maintained houses had a name painted on a small wooden plaque beside the front door. I got close enough to read a few. Harlan, Puckett, Deal, Combs. They were surnames, old Cole family names. I was reading the 4th one when I heard a door close. Not slam. Close, gently, like someone pulling it shut from inside. It came from the house 2 doors down, the one with the garden hose. I stood perfectly still and watched. The curtain in the front window moved, not like wind, like a hand pulling it aside an inch and then letting it fall back. I walked back to my car faster than I'd like to admit. As I was getting in, I looked back down the road one more time. The curtains in all 12 houses were pulled slightly aside, every single one. Like 12 people were standing at their windows, watching me leave. I drove out of that valley as fast as the narrow road would allow. When I got back to campus, I searched the surnames I'd written down. Every single one matched a minor who had died in the Felter mine collapse of 1961. All 12 of them. The sign was right. Felter still has a population. It's just not the living kind. There are 12 houses, 12 names, 12 dead miners still keeping up appearances. That one unsettles me because of how domestic it is, how normal it almost looks, until you realize what's behind those curtains. The next story goes somewhere much darker. This one's called The Well at the center of Harwick. A solo backpacker in Colorado uses an abandoned silver mining town as a campsite, and in the middle of the night, he hears a baby crying from the bottom of a well. I heard the baby crying before I even got out of the car. That's what I can't explain. There is no baby in Harwick, Colorado. There hasn't been anyone in Harwick since 1974. I do solo backpacking trips through remote parts of the Rockies, and I'd planned to use Harwick as a waypoint. It's an old silver mining town about 6 miles off the nearest fire road, high enough in elevation that the air bites your lungs. I'd read that the town was mostly collapsed, but that a few structures were still standing, and I figured I'd set up camp there for the night before continuing over the pass the next morning. I arrived late in the afternoon. The town was smaller than I expected, maybe 15 buildings arranged in a rough grid, all built from the same gray timber that had gone silver with age. Most of the roofs were gone. The windows were just square holes. At the center of town, where the roads intersected, there was a stone well with a wooden frame over it. The bucket was still hanging from the crossbar, swaying slightly in the wind. The crying was faint, thin, the kind of sound a very young infant makes. Not a full wail, but a weak, rhythmic cry. It seemed to come from the direction of the well. I told myself it was the wind moving through the old buildings. The acoustics in mountain valleys can do strange things. I set up my tent about 50 yards from the nearest structure and started making dinner. The crying stopped as the sun went down. I was relieved. Around 9, I was in my tent reading by headlamp when I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps on packed dirt. They circled my tent once, then twice, then stopped right outside the door. I called out. No answer. I unzipped the tent and looked. Nothing, nobody, but in the dirt outside my tent, I could see impressions. Not boot prints, bare feet, small bare feet like a woman's, pressed deep into the hard ground. They led from my tent in a straight line toward the well. I followed them with my headlamp. The prints went right up to the edge of the well and stopped. I looked over the rim. My headlamp barely penetrated the darkness below, but I could see the walls were stone, slick with moisture. The well was deep, deeper than any well needs to be, and the crying started again. From down there, it was louder now. Definitely not wind. It was a baby. The sound bounced off the stone walls and came up warped and echoey, but it was unmistakable. A baby crying at the bottom of a well in a town where no one has lived for 50 years. I backed away from the well. The crying got louder, not because I was closer, because it was getting closer. The sound was rising through the shaft, like something was climbing up. I ran back to my tent, packed my bag in under 2 minutes, and started hiking out by headlamp. It was dangerous to hike that terrain at night, but I didn't care. As I left the town behind, the crying faded, but it didn't stop. It just got further away, like it was following me at a distance, staying just at the edge of hearing. I hiked for 3 hours before I couldn't hear it anymore. When I finally stopped and made camp again, I was shaking so badly I could barely zip my sleeping bag. The next day, back in cell range, I looked up the history of Harwick. The town had been abandoned after the silver ran out, but there was a brief mention in a county historical archive about the well. In 1971, 3 years before the last residents left, a woman named Edith Farrow had dropped her infant son into the well during what the report called a psychotic episode. The baby's body was never recovered. The well was too deep and too narrow for anyone to descend. The report noted that in the 3 years between the incident and the town's abandonment, every remaining resident complained of the same thing: crying at night, coming from the well, getting closer every year. I think they left because it finally reached the top. A sound that's been climbing for 50 years. I don't think I'd ever look into a well again after hearing that. But the next story might be even harder to shake. This one's called The Church with Too Many Pews. A couple explores an unnamed settlement in the Arizona desert. Inside the church, they find pews carved from single pieces of wood, with grooves like veins, and a message scratched into the floor that changes everything. The door was already open when we got there. Not broken open, not hanging off its hinges. Open, like someone had just walked inside and left it ajar for the next person. That should have been our first warning. My girlfriend Tess and I were exploring an unnamed ghost town in rural Arizona. We'd found it on a forum dedicated to forgotten places. No Wikipedia article, no Google Maps pin, just GPS coordinates, and a few blurry photos posted by someone whose account had since been deleted. The post described a small settlement about 20 miles south of a highway rest stop, accessible only by a dirt road that wasn't on any map. We found it exactly where the coordinates said it would be. 7 or 8 buildings, all adobe, baking in the desert sun. No signs, no markers, no indication of what the town had been called or when it had been occupied. The structures were in surprisingly good condition, probably because of the dry climate. Walls still standing, door frames intact, even some of the wooden window shutters were still attached. The largest building was obviously a church. It had a simple steeple and a wooden cross on top, bleached white by decades of sun. The front door was the one standing open. Tess wanted to go inside. I agreed. The interior was dim and hot. Dust hung in the air like fog. The altar was bare, just a stone slab against the far wall. But the pews were still there. Rows of rough wooden benches, enough for maybe 60 people. I counted them because something felt wrong. The building wasn't big enough for that many pews. They were packed tight, barely a foot between each row, and they extended all the way to the back wall with almost no aisle space. It would have been nearly impossible to sit in the middle of any row. You'd have to climb over people to get there. Tess pointed out something else. The pews weren't all the same. The front rows were normal, rough-hewn wood with simple construction. But the further back you went, the darker the wood got, and the construction changed. The back rows weren't built. They were carved. Each rear pew was a single piece of wood, somehow shaped without joints or nails, with strange grooves running along the surface. Not decorative grooves. They looked like channels, like something was meant to flow through them. I was examining the very last pew when Tess whispered my name. She was standing near the altar, pointing at the floor. I walked up to her and looked down. The stone floor in front of the altar had names scratched into it. Dozens of them. They weren't engraved neatly. They were scratched, like someone had used a rock or a nail, pressing hard. Some were in English, some were in Spanish, some were in a language I didn't recognize, and they weren't arranged in rows. They were layered on top of each other, scratched over and over again in the same small area, so densely overlapping that most were illegible. Tess knelt down and tried to read them. She managed to make out a few. Maria, Joseph, Angeline. Then she found one that made her stop. It was more recent than the others. The scratches were lighter, less weathered, and it wasn't a name. It was a sentence. It said we did not leave. They put us in the wood. I looked back at the pews, the dark, carved ones at the back. I looked at the grooves that ran along them like veins, and I felt something I've never felt before. Not fear exactly. Recognition, like some part of my brain was putting together something my conscious mind refused to accept. Tess stood up and said we should go. I agreed. We walked toward the door. It was closed. I know it was open when we came in. I know that, but it was closed now. And when I pushed it, it didn't move. I pushed harder. Nothing. Tess helped me. We shoved together, and finally it gave way, swinging open into the blinding sunlight. We stumbled outside, and I turned to look back in. The pews had changed. I'm sure of it. There was one more row at the back. One more dark, carved bench pressed against the wall, with fresh grooves still wet with sap. We drove out of that desert, and I never looked up those coordinates again. I deleted the forum post from my browser history, but sometimes at night, I think about that sentence scratched into the floor. We did not leave. They put us in the wood. And I think about how many pews were in that church, and I wonder if the number matches anything. A population count, a census, a list of names that stopped appearing in records one day without explanation. I think that town isn't abandoned. I think everyone is still there. There are people absorbed into wood, still there in the grain and the grooves. That's the kind of thing that rewires how you see the world. But this last story, this is the one that disturbed me the most when I read it. It's called The Mirror Town Below Calvary. A geological survey team enters an old copper mine in Montana. Deep underground, they find something impossible, an exact replica of the ghost town above them, built in the dark. And it isn't empty. The town below the town is real. I need someone to understand that before they send anyone else. I was part of a geological survey team contracted by the state of Montana to assess old mining tunnels for collapse risk. Standard work. We'd go in, take measurements, note structural concerns, and move on. In September, we were sent to Calvary, a ghost town in the western part of the state that had been built directly over a network of copper mines in the 1890s. The town itself was small, maybe 30 structures, all of them in advanced decay. Our concern wasn't the surface, it was what was underneath. The main mine entrance was in the hillside, about a quarter mile east of town. We went in as a team of 4, me, Ray, Sandra, and our lead surveyor, Duncan. The shaft descended at a gradual slope for about 300 feet before opening into a large chamber where the copper veins had been excavated. Standard stuff. We spent 2 hours mapping that chamber and 2 adjacent tunnels. Everything was normal until we found the 3rd tunnel. It wasn't on our maps. The original mine schematics didn't show it, but it was there, branching off from the main chamber at a sharp angle, heading downward. The walls were different. The main tunnels had rough, blasted surfaces. This one was smooth, almost polished, like someone had spent years grinding the stone flat. Duncan wanted to investigate. He said it might be an undocumented shaft that could pose a collapse risk to the surface. We followed it down. It went straight for about 200 feet, then leveled off and opened up into a space that made all 4 of us stop in our tracks. It was a street, underground in complete darkness, at least 100 feet below the surface. There was a street, dirt floor packed hard, with structures on either side. The structures were made of timber and stone. They had doors, they had windows, they were arranged in a grid pattern. Sandra said it was probably an underground settlement from the mining days. Some old mining towns had subterranean quarters for workers. But Duncan shook his head. He pointed his headlamp at the nearest building and said something that made my stomach drop. The building was identical to the general store on the surface. Same dimensions, same placement relative to the road, same number of windows. He was right. I recognized it too. This underground street was a mirror of Calvary's main road above us. Every building I could see corresponded to one on the surface. The church, the assay office, the company houses, all of them rebuilt in the dark. We walked further in. Our headlamps swept across the buildings, and I started noticing details. The doors were all closed. Each one had a symbol scratched into it. The same symbol, something circular with radiating lines. And the air was wrong. It was warm, not cool like a cave should be. Warm and slightly humid, like a room where people have been breathing. Ray found something inside one of the houses. He pushed the door open and called us over. Inside, the single room was furnished. A bed frame with a straw mattress, a table with a tin cup on it, and on the wall, scratched into the stone in the same deliberate hand as the symbols on the doors, were tally marks. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, covering every wall from floor to ceiling. Sandra counted a small section and extrapolated. She estimated over 40,000 marks. If each mark represented a day, that was over 100 years of counting. Duncan said we needed to leave and report this. I agreed, but as we turned back toward the tunnel, Ray pointed his light at the far end of the underground street. There was something there, a shape. It was standing in the middle of the road, at the very edge of our light's reach. It was the size and shape of a person, but it didn't move. It just stood there. Duncan called out to it. The echo of his voice bounced off the underground buildings and came back to us layered, like multiple people were speaking at once. The shape didn't respond, but another one appeared behind it, then another, then more, emerging from the buildings on either side of the underground street. They moved slowly, stepping out of doorways and standing in the road facing us. I counted 7 before I stopped counting. We ran, all 4 of us, back up the smooth tunnel, through the main chamber, up the shaft, and out into daylight. We were all gasping. Sandra was crying. Duncan radioed the base team and told them to seal the mine entrance immediately. Here's where it gets worse. When we submitted our report, the state cross-referenced our findings with historical records. Calvary's population at its peak was listed as 112. When the town was abandoned in 1903, the official record stated that all residents relocated to nearby settlements. But a separate county document, a tax roll from 1904, noted that only 81 former Calvary residents could be accounted for in the surrounding area. 31 people were never found. They weren't listed as dead. They weren't listed as having moved. They just stopped existing in any record. 31 people. The mine entrance has been sealed with concrete. But I keep thinking about those tally marks. Someone was counting days down there for over 100 years, and the shapes we saw were standing. They were waiting, like they knew we'd come eventually. I quit the survey team last month. I don't go underground anymore, but sometimes, when it's very quiet, I swear I can feel a faint vibration through the floor, like footsteps a long way down, still walking the streets of a town that exists below the one everyone forgot. A mirror town, built underground, occupied for over a century by people who were never supposed to be there. The mine is sealed now, but concrete only goes so deep. And those tally marks, someone was counting, waiting, for a very long time. That's all for tonight. If you've ever visited a ghost town and something felt wrong, something you couldn't quite explain, I'd like to hear about it. Leave your story in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe. There are always more stories to tell.
And that's where tonight's file closes, but the archives are far from empty. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and join us as we uncover more horrors, mysteries, and true crimes hidden in the horror archives. Until next time, keep the lights low, keep listening, because you never know what story we'll uncover next.